Love God, love people, love people, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Hey everybody, welcome to the AC Podcast. This is Steve, and I have a very special guest with me today, somebody that I've been really hoping to get to speak to in person. I guess this isn't exactly in person, but this is the next best thing. So I have on the line all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina, we have Dr. Joel Muddamalle. So let me give you a quick introduction. Dr. Muddamalle, or Dr. Joel as he's often referred to, he's a theologian and Bible teacher with a PhD in theology who frequently speaks at conferences, churches, and other events. He is the director of theology and research at Proverbs 31 Ministries and co-hosts the Therapy and Theology podcast with a licensed counselor, Jim Crass, and a co-host, Lisa. I'm going to get this wrong, but you can correct me, Dr. Joel.
Yeah, Lisa Turkhurst.
Turkhurst. Okay,
Yep.
Good. Awesome. It sounds very interesting, by the way. He authored The Hidden Peace, Finding True Security, Strength, and Confidence Through Humility, published in 2024. And some fun facts, he's an avid coffee drinker. You're welcome, Starbucks. He loves Air Jordan Retro 1s. He's from Chicago. And for those of you sneaker nerds, that should tell you everything you need to know about Dr. Joel. And his all-time favorite theologian is none other than St. Augustine of Hippo. Dr. Joel, welcome to the AC Podcast.
Thanks, Steve. I'm so excited to be talking with you, and I do wish we were in person together, but we were just talking offline that maybe we can figure out how to make that happen here shortly.
Yeah, at some point. And we've been wanting to have Dr. Joel out to our conference. It's just logistically hasn't worked out, but we'll see what happens in the future, especially for those of you who are aware that AC is looking to expand into the U.S. With the help of our friend Harry down in California there. So who knows? This just might happen. Now, before we get started, I always want to sort of humanize our guest in the eyes of the audience or in the ears of the audience. So at the risk of sounding really philosophical, who is Joel Muddamalle?
Yeah. That's a good question. So if you're listening to me, you might not know this, but if you see me, I'm Indian. My parents immigrated from India, from Hyderabad, in their early 20s. I was born and raised in the Chicagoland area. Growing up as a child of immigrant parents in Chicago was quite a journey, and was a very special part of my life. My grandparents are missionaries in India. They have been in ministry for over 65 years in India, and so kind of unique for an Indian kid to essentially kind of have the story of Jesus always around him, So that has just been kind of my witness and my testimony. A lot of friends growing up that were Hindu, Buddhist, atheist, different, positions on the religious spectrum. But for me, the story of Jesus and the Bible was so crucial for every part of my life. I went through a season of rebellion, real serious, severe rebellion through high school. And really, I kind of just say the Lord rescued me and saved me. And I just felt this deep call to ministry. Got to start. This is a funny story. I got to start as a worship leader. And so I used to lead worship. And really along the way, Steve, I think I just got really passionate about the words that we sing. What are we singing? Why are we singing them? Are these words true of the biblical text? Are they true theologically? Started to get kind of consumed with the ancient hymns, loved them. And really, long story short, I realized what I was really passionate about was actually theology. I was actually really passionate about the biblical text, And so there's a great quote about what theology is from a 17th century astronomer, Johannes Kepler, who simply said, theology is simply thinking God's thoughts after him. And so for me, that's just kind of been my journey. I'm a husband. My wife, Brittany, and I have been married for 16 years. We're going on 17 17 years. We've got 4 kids. Liam, Levi, and Lucas are our 3 boys, 14, 13, and 11. And then on Valentine's Day, 6 years ago, we welcomed our baby girl, Amelia Jane, who I've nicknamed
Congratulations.
MJ. Yeah.
Okay.
I nicknamed her MJ after the greatest basketball player of all time. So there's my Chicago roots that are coming back out. But man, if you were to just ask, like, I'm a Marvel nerd. I love Marvel and comics. I still love playing basketball.
I was thinking, because when you first said MJ, I was thinking Mary Jane from Spider-Man.
So. Yeah. We could talk about that, about culture and context later on in this conversation, I'm sure, and how crucial that is, even in understanding and reading the biblical text. But yeah, that's kind of a snapshot. If you just want to summarize who I am, I'm a Bible nerd. I just really do love the Bible.
Wonderful.
And my hope and my vision really is I've done academic work, but I really have this deep desire that the ivory tower of theology that often is, just isolated up there, unattainable, ought to actually be accessible to the everyday average Bible reader. And so that's kind of my passion. I am more of a collector, connector, and communicator of theology. I rely heavily on the scholars that are doing primary research, and I kind of love interacting with their work and, connecting and doing a bit more of a biblical theological work to communicate those in the grand scheme of the story of Scripture, and then how it ought to apply to our lives today.
Oh, that's wonderful. One topic that I've been really wanting to discuss is the divine counsel view. And part of the reason is that at AC, we get quite a few questions come in from various followers of our ministry who just want to know more about it. Others feel a little confused by it. And some others are skeptical about, is this orthodox or is this just completely heretical? What is going on here? So there's a lot of questions surrounding the divine counsel view. So let's start here. Dr. Joel, what is the divine counsel view for those who are maybe encountering this term for the first time? Can you break it down for us?
I think that's a really great question, Steve. And in fact, the divine counsel sometimes is often considered a new or novel theological invention, a modern theological idea, maybe from some modern scholars or theologians who have seen something in the text and they're trying to systematize it. And yet it's actually not. It is something that was well understood in Second Temple literature, in the Hebraic culture of the biblical time period. And so what this idea is, I'll give kind of a big 30,000-foot idea in just layman's terms, and then maybe we can look at a couple passages that lay this out explicitly. But the divine counsel worldview is an idea that God is king. God is king of heaven and earth, and all kings have kingdoms. Inside of the kingdom are citizens, and the king typically always has a royal court. The royal court is made up of trusted individuals that are tasked on mission and vocation, and they have a responsibility. They're subjected underneath the king, and yet they are, and I think often of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul, who says that you and I are ambassadors of Christ. It's this idea of the ministry of reconciliation. And we are representing the high king of heaven and earth. And so we find these interesting passages in the Old Testament particularly that present God as a king amongst a heavenly host. And so we have to ask ourselves, why would God be intentionally portrayed through the biblical text as a king amidst a heavenly host? Are these throwaway statements, ideas that are just for fun, or do they hold a crucial understanding for how we ought to see the work of God in and throughout creation? And so you have a passage like Psalm 82, which is one of my favorite passages to kind of look at the divine counsel worldview. I'm going to read the passage. It says that God, that first instance of God is Elohim. It's singular. The construction of the word is plural, but it's singular here, and it's referring to Yahweh, the uncreated creator. So God has taken his place in the divine counsel. In the midst of the Elohim, the gods, he holds judgment. There's a bunch of nerdy Hebrew grammar things here, but essentially you can't have a single individual in the midst of anything other than a plural assembly. And so that's where you get the sense that you have a single God in the midst of the gods.
So you're reading from Psalm 82, is that right?
Yep. Psalm 82.
And there's a very clear mention of divine counsel.
Yeah, the Hebrew phrase there is Elodat, but so God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And now this is God's speech. This is what God is saying to these members of the divine council. And that word there for the gods is, once again, Elohim. I know we're going to talk about Elohim later on, but the idea is that we have the uncreated creator who has taken his place amongst the divine council. He's the king. He's sitting, and now this is a judgment scene. The king is about to take some people to task because of their irresponsibility and their wickedness. So what is their irresponsibility? This is what Yahweh says to them. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? And then he says, this is what you were supposed to do. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless, to maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, to rescue the weak and the needy, to deliver them from the hand of the wicked. And then it goes out of the direct speech into commentary, talking about these individuals. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. And then it goes back into direct speech. Yahweh says, I said, you are Elohim. And then really interesting, the familial language for these Elohim is, you are sons of the Most High. Which is a synonymous related term to another phrase, sons of God, which in Hebrew is B'nai Ha-Elohim. And so here you have a description of these beings as sons of the Most High, all of you. And then here's the consequence. Nevertheless, and the contrast is being made with humanity, and nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. And then at the very end of this, Steve, is a brilliant little line here that I think is so important. It's again, this last line is Yahweh, I think, saying to another Elohim who's kind of off stage. It says, arise, O God, arise, O Elohim, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. So who's the one who judges the earth? Who is the one who inherits the nations?
Right. Yeah, this is very fascinating. I think it would be worth just slowing down here, just appreciate the kind of royal image, the kingly image. Because I think especially in the West, Protestant evangelicals, especially when we think about God, we almost have this too individualistic of a view. We imagine God perhaps before the creation of the world existing just in the Trinity, in the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but there's no one else. But I think this imagery of, okay, you know what, that he is a king, and what does a king have? He has his court. He's not alone, right? It's not this atomized view of who God is, but it's almost like there are others with him. Now, this is where I think a lot of people get concerned, especially for those who are very committed to the historic biblical orthodoxy. Yeah. Because to them, it sounds like, are you saying there are other gods? Are you now committing, to yourself to polytheism?
Theism. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how would you hash that out? Because it seems to me like a lot of it revolves around the word Elohim.
Elohim, yeah. Okay, so a couple things. I want to just tie the bow on the divine counsel idea, because some people might be able to say, no, you're good. Some people might be like, well, are you proof texting just from Psalm 82? To which I'd say, no, Psalm 82, I think, is one of the clearest examples of that. But you have a passage like Psalm 89 in verse 6 that says, and this is exactly what you're talking about, Steve, for who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? A God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones. So Psalm 89, and there's actually so many other Psalms. Every time you hear the phrase, the Lord of hosts, is an idea of an image of a king, a royal warrior king in the midst of a holy assembly, a divine assembly. You have the opening pages of Job chapter 1, that has the sons of God that present themselves to God in a throne room scenario. One of these spiritual beings is the Hasatan, the accuser, the adversary, who has kind of a judicial responsibility tasked with identifying evil in the world. But that scene, I want to focus on that scene of God as king amongst a royal court is actually made explicit in Job 1. Same in Job chapter 2, where there's a second scenario of that. And then the other one, and it goes directly to, once again, what you were saying, is Job 38, verse 7, that says, when the morning stars sang together, this is talking about the beginning of all of creation. This is kind of where God has been silent for basically 37 chapters. Job has been pontificating the chaos of his life. His friends have been knuckleheads all the way through this, and you've got this stark sense of silence until finally in chapter 38, Yahweh steps in and is like, I got you, now you've done all your thinking and pontificating and processing and speculating. Let me just kind of take it to task. And there's actually a brilliant scholar. His name is Eric Ortland. Eric wrote a great book on a commentary, kind of a biblical theological commentary on Job. I think it's called Piercing Leviathan is the name of it. Essentially, he points out in the Hebrew grammar, while you and I would kind of look at this, and even the way I was kind of describing it would be like, oh man, God's about to take this dude to task. There's something subtle that's happening here that is reflective of a good father who, as a rhetorical device, invites his children into conversation. And so even late into Job 38 is the evidence of a good God who's asking us to consider. And here's what he says in terms of like when the foundations of the earth were first created, verse 7, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God, the Bene Elohim, shouted for joy. Why I think this is really important is because this identifies these sons of God, Bene Elohim, prior to the creation of humanity.
That's right.
So it is incongruent, right? Incoherent in order to read into this human rulers or humanity as the ones who are shouting for joy because they weren't created yet. To all of this, you're absolutely right. Some people are going to start to panic a little bit and say, the other passage is 1 Kings 22, 19 through 23, which is this another explicit scene where the prophet Micaiah, he describes the Lord seated in his throne with a multitude of heavenly beings that are standing all around him. And that's a different scene. But the question and the concern, and I think this is a valid, good question to ask is, does this now suggest or imply that God is one among many other spiritual beings and they are equitable in nature? Or maybe God is superior, right? Like he is a higher being and yet still ontologically similar to these other spiritual beings, to which I would say no. Absolutely not. And my doctoral advisor, he was my second reader, and really an individual who I would say didn't pioneer the divine council, but pioneered a retrieval of the divine council worldview as something that we should really highly consider, is a guy named Dr. Michael Heiser. And I think Mike was brilliant. Sadly, as I was finishing my dissertation, I submitted chapter 3, and Mike was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And so I actually was the very last PhD student that he supervised and finished through the end. And my first reader is a brilliant New Testament scholar by the name of Dr. Patrick Schreiner. Patrick has done incredible work on the Ascension, has written commentaries on Acts. And so I was actually Patrick's first PhD student that he minted. And so kind of interesting. I'm like bookending the careers of these brilliant scholars. And one of the things that Mike said that I think is really important as a little catchphrase to this is that the term in question is the term Elohim. So the Hebrew word Elohim is what you and I would translate in English as God. Now, the word itself is grammatically plural, but the distinction between if we're talking about many or one is based off of context. And even sometimes what happens, especially when it's talking about Yahweh, when Yahweh is being referred to as Elohim and the article is placed in front of it, So you have the God, similar to like
Right.
colleges now. You've got Ohio State. Like if anybody who went to Ohio State, they already are annoyed at me because they're like, no, we're not Ohio State. We are the Ohio State.
Ohio
You know,
State, yeah.
it's to say it's like you are the one. So this was Mike's statement. Mike would say that Yahweh is Elohim, but no other Elohim could ever be Yahweh. In
Okay,
other
I think
words,
this is where we need to slow down because
Yep.
this can get a little bit abstract here, and it's really easy to lose people. So what I'm hearing you say is Elohim is a word that's being used to refer to just supernatural beings in general, but when we're talking about this word can also be used to refer to Yahweh God.
yes.
But that is not to say that Yahweh God is just like other supernatural beings, that he is somehow same in nature, but just greater in degree. We're saying, no, he is he's a category of his own, but we use the word Elohim to refer to Yahweh God as well as other supernatural beings.
Yeah, this is where our English language is a bit flat. We depend highly on context, and even our kind of modern ideas that we implant into English words can sometimes mess us up a little bit. So for instance, we get caught up by the English word God, and we would maybe be able to clearly see a distinction between a capital G God. I think this is how like we would say it's like Yahweh is capital G God, but all these other Elohim are lowercase g gods. But the problem still is, well, are they ontologically the same? To which I would say no. So the Hebrew word Elohim is a term that describes place of residence. The place of residence. It is a term that describes often, the majority of the time, disembodied spiritual beings. Disembodied spiritual beings. For instance, it's referred to as Yahweh, the uncreated creator, Genesis 1. It's referred to the gods of the nations, Exodus 12:12, Joshua 24:20. It's referred to angelic beings, the sons of God, Psalm 29:1, Job 1:6. It's referred to as demonic entities. So evil beings, Deuteronomy 32:17 is an incredibly important one that places Elohim right next to the Hebrew term shadim, which is where we get demons. It's also interestingly referred to the disembodied human dead. This is the term that's used in 1 Samuel 28:13 of the shade or the ghost of Samuel who comes up out of the grave. This is the whole Witch of Endor scene. It's used of the angel of the Lord in Genesis 35:7, and it is rarely, and to my knowledge, the only time it's kind of ever used in this way, it is used of rulers or judges. Extremely rare, found in Exodus 21:6. And so of the 7 categories kind of that I've listed out, 6 of the 7 categories, the overwhelming majority of the instances of Elohim is a place of residence term that is used of disembodied spiritual beings. So who is God? God is spirit, right? That's what John tells us. God is spirit. So from a linguistic standpoint, yeah, God is Elohim. However, God is not Elohim in the same way, the same degree, the same ontological existence as any other Elohim. And this is where we retain monotheism. This is not an invitation into polytheism. That's not how the Bible portrays it. You've got the Shema of Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You've got passages like Isaiah 44:6-8, where, this oracle of Isaiah where it says, I'm the first and I'm the last. Apart from me, there is no God. Or Isaiah 45:5-6, I'm the Lord and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God. Point of clarification. This is not a denial of the existence of other supernatural beings. It is a declaration of non-comparability. It's a declaration of non-comparability. And while Mike would say that Yahweh is species unique, or that Yahweh is Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh, I would say it this way. Yahweh is the uncreated creator. He's the uncreated creator, which means Yahweh is categorically, ontologically distinct in every category because he has no beginning and he has no end. He's uncreated. Every other created thing, everything else in all of human existence is different fundamentally because they have an origination point. They are created by God. And so, now some people would be like, well, why is this important? You know, why are we spending so much time talking about this? To which I'm a little bit empathetic for. I don't want us to miss, like don't miss Jesus in all of this. Don't miss the victory of Christ over sin and death. And you and I are called to spiritual maturity. Like the scriptures themselves are an invitation to know an unknowable God, which is like, wow, what an incredible opportunity that we have. And I think it equips us, particularly from an apologetic standpoint, to be able to now distinguish clearly with other religious frameworks that would want to leverage and utilize this concept and this idea of a multiplicity of spiritual beings and just place Christianity as one amongst the many. You know, a lot of my Hindu friends would be like, oh man, we're all one. This is karma. Like we're all, you know, to which I'm like, no, we fundamentally differ in this one area. And in fact, I think that this is a tactic of the enemy in order to blur these lines rather than creating the distinction while also creating space for the reality of actual spiritual beings that are malevolent, that absolutely hate you and I.
Last time on Can I Trust the Bible? We visited Egypt to investigate missing Gospels and the reliability of ancient documents. Now, we're headed to Turkey and Italy to confront one of the most misunderstood events in history, the Council of Nicaea.
Wes and Andy here. We are in Lake Iznik, the modern site of the ancient city of Nicaea.
Was this a secret room where politicians voted on the Bible's contents? Did Emperor Constantine invent the divinity of Jesus to unify a fractured empire? Or were these beliefs already etched into the walls of the early church?
We're here in Rome at Palatine Hill, where the Alexamenos graffito was discovered.
This is about 100 years before any of the events of the Council of Nicaea even took place. So any accusation of that being invented is basically blown out of the water.
Since you brought up Hinduism, I thought it was really interesting because when you brought up Psalm 82, you know, you are gods, right? I know just immediately I was thinking of, this would be a great apologetic for Mormonism, because a lot of Mormons like to leverage that and say, see, you and I are gods, because Jesus said that. Even he quotes this.
In John,
in John. And so that means you and I are like, basically we are same in kind with God. We just different degree. We can become gods. But if the divine council view and the word Elohim is properly understood, it's actually an apologetic against Mormonism. And then you brought up Hinduism, which was an angle that I wasn't really thinking of, but that also makes a lot of sense. Now, I was just wondering then, since you brought up Jesus, we want to start moving in that direction. But one thing that I really found helpful about the divine council view is its explanatory scope, meaning it helps us make sense of a lot of these passages that really puzzle us in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of things like, you know, I mean, you already mentioned, why is the accuser in the presence of God in the book of Job? Or, you know, who are the Nephilim in Genesis 6? Or what about 1 Peter 3:18 to 20, where Jesus is preaching to the spirits that are bound in prison? Like, what do we make of all of these things? So maybe let's take a couple of those and see how the divine council view cashes all of this out.
Yeah, you know, you have passages like in Ephesians. I wrote my dissertation on Ephesians 2:18 through 22, and so spent a lot of time kind of looking at how Paul understood the spirit realm, particularly. My argument, Steve, kind of from a thesis standpoint in my dissertation is that actually I know because I read any commentary that was accessible I had to read. So that was a lot of time reading through all the commentaries on Ephesians. And, you know, the vast majority, 99% 99% of them all want to draw on a backdrop of the Temple of Artemis and the Greco-Roman culture that Paul is dealing with. Now, I would say yes, absolutely. And I want to add, Paul's a really good Jewish boy, well-trained in the Hebrew scriptures. So I don't think Paul is one-dimensional. I think he is like a linguistic, cultural, sociological ninja. Like, he's a master. He's doing jujitsu out there. And one of the things that he's doing is, I believe he's drawing on an ancient Hebraic story that predates the Artemis cult and the Temple of Artemis, one of the wonders of the world. And he's actually drawing back to the Tower of Babel. He's drawing to the Tower of Babel, which the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11 is a ziggurat temple tower. For you and I today, our modern enlightenment, post-enlightenment movement, modern 21st century, we look at the natural order and we often demythologize or despiritualize how the ancient reader, the ancient individual conceived of these things. And there's this biblical conception called accommodation that, God accommodates as he divinely inspires and gives his words to human authors. A kind of joke about this with the Bible. Often people are like, the Bible is a book. I'm like, no, the Bible's not a book. The Bible is a library of books,
that's right. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like you've got 66 different books, 40 different authors across 3 continents, 3 languages, some 2,000 years. I mean, by the way, the Bible in itself is a miracle. Like, if you want to just like from an apologetic standpoint, I kind of find it fascinating. And I'm not trained as an apologist, so like I'm punching well out of my weight class, even trying to talk about this with you, Steve. Like, you're the one who should be teaching on this. But when I'm talking to my apologist friends, I'm just like, man, just the Bible, like the internal evidence inside of the scriptures. We're talking about a time where there ain't no Wi-Fi, there's no Facebook, there's no way to communicate and to leave like, hey, you deal with this flood story, you deal with this serpentine imagery, and let's collude together it's like none of that is there.
I mean, if this was a conspiracy, it would be one heck of a conspiracy. Somebody who can manage what goes on, over almost 15 centuries of these writings being written and compiled and all of those things. And it's just unrealistic to suspect any kind of conspiracy here. But yeah, this is just really fascinating.
Yeah, and so my point in that is that God doesn't see it necessary. And sometimes people will get stressed out with me on this, and I understand. Like, this may be a bit challenging, but maybe just hear me out on this. I personally don't view, and there's other scholars and theologians that would agree with me, the Bible, particularly Genesis chapters 1 through 11, 1 through 12, it's not trying to prove science to us. God is less concerned about trying to prove science to us as he is utilizing through Moses, who I'm a traditionalist. I believe Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Through the hand of Moses being inspired by the Spirit of God is giving us a polemic, an argument against the competing creation myths, the creation stories of the time, particularly the Enuma Elish, the story of the Kalu. You've got these narratives that are being strung along to deceive God's people. And so here becomes like, hey, by the way, what they call it, the best form of flattery is plagiarism or something like that. It's kind of like this saying. The enemy's not trying to recreate the wheel. They're not trying to create brand new stories. They're actually trying to take the one true story and corrupt that one true story. It's like, make it look good, smell good, feel good, but then have that as a deception. And why is this all important to what we were just talking about? Because the way the ancient Israelites and in the New Testament, the Greco-Roman culture, the way they viewed the world was a particular cosmology, a particular cosmological understanding of the way the heavens and the earth operated. So today, when we look at an object like the mountains, we think of the mountains as a fun place for you and I to go on a hike, maybe to take a selfie, like for us, that's the thrill of it. In the ancient worldview, they look at the mountains and they go, my goodness, the mountains, that's the meeting place of God. That's the meeting place of the gods. This is where heaven and earth meet. This is the imagery that's actually being presented to us, that at the peak of the mountains is where the divine council is held. The base of the mountain is like this pathway to and fro. The middle part. Then,
Which, by the way, then, you should look at the story of Exodus, where now God's people are being consecrated. And where is this all happening? It's at the foot of the mountain. Right? And Moses goes up the mountain to encounter God, and how that then informs what we see with Jesus' transfiguration, which happens on a mountain, where now the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, now they are seeing Christ glorified, and who's there? Moses and Elijah. And this is a meeting place, right? And so there's a lot that we can miss if we don't appreciate those sort of the ancient cosmology and how they understood things. So I think this is really important, just from a hermeneutic standpoint, how we interpret the Bible.
Yeah, and I mean, so I go through a lot of this in my book, The Unseen Battle, which is what, we pulled, basically my dissertation, we turned into an academic leaning book, but my goal is for it to be accessible for the everyday average reader. So you can get a lot of heavy theology, you can get a lot of footnotes, you get original language stuff, and then I included a bunch of sidebars in there along the way, just to give your brain a little bit of a mental break from the exegesis and the cultural analysis. And we deal with some of these things of the ancient Hebrew cosmology. What do Christians do with tarot cards? Like, should we read Second Temple literature? Like how do we deal with literature that's not part of the canon of Scripture, and kind of deal with all of this? And so, in The Unseen Battle, in the first 3 chapters, particularly, I deal with this issue of cosmology and mountains, because Eden is on a mountain. Eden, like Eden, the garden of God is on a mountain. You've got 2 rivers that are running down from it, right? You've got in Isaiah and Ezekiel placing Eden on the holy mount of God. And so you've got this sense that, and actually the scholar who's done, I think, some of the most significant work on this is a guy named G.K. Beale, a biblical theologian. And G.K. Beale is brilliant. He wrote a book all about the temple and the mission of God, where he recommunicates to us that Eden is the archetype temple. Eden is the first temple of God. In fact, the very coordinates and construction of the temple of God is based off of an Edenic vision. This is why you have cherubim, angelic figures, who are engraved onto the doorposts and onto the actual, furniture in the temple itself, because you have cherubim who are placed outside of Eden to protect Eden after the fall. The ancient Hebrew cosmology and the Greco-Roman understanding. So in Ephesians, when Paul talks about the heavenlies, Ben Witherington did a really great job of trying to outline what this could mean. It could mean, the heavenlies is just the natural sky. It could mean that the heavenlies is the unique location where God resides. Or it could be that the heavenlies is the general space where spiritual, supernatural beings find their locale, which makes sense of, I opt for that third view, which makes sense of Ephesians, that says, you've got the prince of the power of the air. You've got Satan who's here. You've got these angelic beings who are fallen, malevolent, who are working through systems and structures. Paul's language is power and authorities, or arche, exousia, dunamis, thrones. And so why is all of this important? It helps us to retrieve how the biblical writings themselves are understanding what's taking place. And so when you have in Job, the Hasatan, the accuser who shows up, we think in our brain, well, how can a evil figure show up in the presence of God? There's a couple things about this. One, and this would be Mike's position, and a lot of Hebrew scholars would point this out, some doubt of whether we're actually talking about Satan as in Lucifer, or the angelic being who's cast out, the Nakash of Genesis, chapter 3, that comes into the Garden of Eden. There's a little bit of doubt here of whether we're talking about the exact same ontological being, from a purely kind of Hebrew grammar standpoint. Anytime you have the article in front, we're not talking about a personal name, we're talking about a title often. So that's what some of your Bible. the accuser. In some of your Bible translations, it'll say the Satan. I remember when I was first kind of like getting into this as a high school kid, I read a Bible translation that said the Satan, and I was like, there's a typo. There's a typo in my Bible. That doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, it does with the Hebrew grammar, right? And then sometimes they'll say the accuser or the adversary. So you'll have that. Me personally, I'm a biblical theology guy. I have no problem. This is an area that Mike and I differed on. I have no problem looking at Genesis through Revelation and seeing the unraveling of the story of Scripture and reading back into that individual a satanic kind of figure, that we're supposed to pull out of that. By the way, this is how the enemy works. Like, the enemy loves to be the accuser. He loves to bring up your past sin in front of you. Like, he loves to try to cripple you with shame and sin. And this is what God does. God's like, I've got you. Yeah. I'm going to cover you in my blood. Like, I'm going to cover you in the blood of Jesus. Like, the accuser can go, but the accuser actually has no authority over you. I have ultimate authority. And while you might experience pain in the moment, which is a reality of just a fallen world, real sin, maybe even an enemy who's working against you, there is still a beautiful future for you, whether you realize it on this side of eternity or not. In the story of Job, things get really good for him. In some of our stories, things don't get really good for us. We will experience pain. We will experience the just tragedy of death. And death is but a gateway into the new heavens and the new earth, where we'll experience the goodness of God.
Do you remember the first time you heard the gospel? That moment when someone spoke the good news of Jesus Christ into your life? Maybe it was a friend, maybe a stranger, maybe your mom? Whoever it was and whenever it happened, that moment shaped who you are today. It's how you came to love Jesus, and it's why you love people the way you do. Because the God who created everything sent his son to die in your place. And then he sent someone else to share that good news with you. And now it's your turn. Your turn to be that someone for someone else. And we're here to help you step into that calling. Visit sharewordglobal.com/AC to find out.
Thank you for that. We're running low on time here, so I want to ask a couple more questions that in some ways kind of try to tie this all together. Before we get there, though, I'm just curious, because this passage in 1 Peter 3, 18 to 20, what is up with that? Because that's what actually I remember reading Unseen Realm by Mike Heiser. And that passage he mentions very specifically, where he went to this church and they were going through 1 Peter. And then when it came the time for the pastor to preach on this particular passage, he just skipped over it, saying it's just too weird. And Dr. Heiser never went back to that church because he was really looking forward to some exposition on this. Like, what are these spirits in chains? Like, what is going on here? And I think him really delving into the divine counsel view actually helped make sense of this. So can you just quickly hash that out for us before we move on to the last question?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here. I actually deal in the Unseen Battle. I have an entire sidebar that gets into this in detail. So if people are like, wait, I need more, I need footnotes, I need the scholarship behind it, check it out in the Unseen Battle. Essentially what's happening here is the Bible presents the underworld. The Hebrew term for it is Sheol. In the New Testament, we get the Greek term Hades. And the conception of this underworld is a separation of categories where you have one locale for the righteous dead of the Old Testament. We could call this Sheol. We could call this Hades. Then there's another locale, and this locale is still Sheol. It's still the underworld, and it is separated but reserved for fallen supernatural beings that have gone into full-blown rebellion. We could call this place the depths of Hades. And so this is actually what's happening in, I'm just going to pull this up for us so that we have it. This is what's happening in Jude. So if you go to the book of, or the letter of Jude, Jude talks about this in Jude chapter, it's not just one chapter, Jude verse 6. It says, "And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day." And so, that sentence right there is actually an echo. There's some debate on whether this is a direct quote or not a direct quote. I think this is a direct quote of actually the Enochic tradition of the Book of Enoch, which was a Second Temple literature book that was in the writing that was in the time. In precision, it's actually 3 books. The first book is the Book of the Watchers. The second 2 books are kind of whack and wild. They come much later in dating and much less reliable in a lot of ways. And yet you find both Jude and Peter who either echo or quote this Enochic tradition. Well, what is this Enochic tradition? It's actually exploring what took place in Genesis chapter 6 with the sons of God, the Bene Elohim, who see the daughters of man, see them, desire them, take them for themselves, and in so doing, the production of this unholy union is the Nephilim, the mighty men of old, right? The Hebrew term for Nephilim is a highly contested word. In quite frankness, we don't know that, like, what that term actually meant, and that's why I think it's good that English translations just transliterate the Hebrew term versus trying to, come to an exact definition.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, the idea is it comes from the Hebrew verb nephal, which means fallen ones or to fall. The Septuagint translates Nephilim as gigos, as giants. The bottom line is that these beings are massive. They're huge, and it's incongruent to me. So I hold a supernatural view that these sons of God are spiritual beings, and they have an unholy union with human women, and this is the precursor to the flood. The Enochic tradition suggests that this whole deal happens on another mountain, Mount Hermon, wild. And not only does it happen on Mount Hermon, but there's a consequence for these angelic beings for their transgression. So what is the consequence? That they're sent in chains and put into the depths of Hades. And so that's where their locale is. These specific beings. These beings are distinct and different from Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, which describe a different group of sons of God who are given to the nations of the world as stewards. These sons of God of Genesis chapter 6 are put in chains and placed in Tartarus. They're placed in the depths of Hades. And so with that in mind, keep in mind also that there's this constant theme throughout the Old Testament where the people of God are very concerned with where their bodies are laid. Joseph is like, hey, by the way, to his knucklehead brothers, don't leave me in Egypt. My bones, don't leave my bones in Egypt. Take me with it. Like, don't mess me up. You messed me up in the first place. Don't do it again. Like, take my bones and bury it with my fathers. This is where the patriarchs, they care about where they're buried. They care about that. Moses, this is actually a whole issue with Moses and this fight that happens, over the body of Moses in the New Testament. Moses technically dies outside of the promised land. And so there's this idea of cosmic geography that's also taking place. And so with Genesis 6, the sons of God transgress. And when they transgress, they're placed into this pit as punishment. In the Old Testament, the people of God care about where they're buried because they want to be in the domain of the Lord. And they care about being in Sheol, where the righteous dead of the Old Testament go. There's a different place for the unrighteous dead. This is why David cries out. It's quoted in Acts chapter 2. You're not going to leave your Holy One. Like, I know, God, you're not going to leave your Holy One in Sheol, that you're going to rescue the Anointed One. And so when you get to a passage like, let's look at 1 Peter, right? It says 1 Peter 3:18. Let's start in 18. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed. The Greek word there comes from the word caruso, which means to announce or to herald. It's an interesting word. To announce or to proclaim, to herald to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. Well, what is the days of Noah? That's Genesis 6, bro. While the ark was being prepared, and it goes into baptism and all this other stuff. And then at the very end, it talks about in 22, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers have been subjected to him. So contextually throughout this, you have a supernatural reading really of Genesis 6. And then you have a passage in Ephesians 4. And then I just want to get to the text because I don't want people to accuse me of being like, you're just, making stuff up. So
fast and loose. Yeah.
So Ephesians 4, verse 8, therefore it says, when he, talking about Jesus, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives and he gave gifts to men. In saying he ascended, what does it mean? But that he had also descended into the lower regions, the earth. He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. Okay, so what's happening? In the Old Testament, if you were a follower of Yahweh, you would go to the place of the righteous dead of the Old Testament. In the depths of Hades were these angelic beings who were left in prison. Think about Jesus' vocation and ministry. Many New Testament scholars point out that Jesus in the Gospels is retelling the story of Israel. He's reliving the story of Israel and all the faithlessness of Israel. Jesus is faithful. This is prior to the establishment of the new covenant. When does the new covenant actually come into existence? I would make the argument that the new covenant is actually established upon the ascension of Christ. Upon the ascension of Christ is when we step into this new covenant experience where the Spirit of God now indwells inside the children of God. So when Jesus dies on the cross and he goes into the grave, where is he? His physical body is there, but where is he? Well, where do the righteous of the Old Testament go? They go to Sheol. So where does Jesus go? I view that he goes to not hell. This is where things get sideways.
Right.
Not hell. Hell is associated with the Greek word Gehenna, which was like a physical place, the valley of Hinnom or child sacrifice. Like that's the image that's given of the final resting place. Now, I know there's a whole bunch of debate on the nature of hell. We could talk about that some other day, but we're not talking about hell. We're talking about Sheol or Hades. In Matthew, you have this parable, the story that's told of the rich man and Lazarus, and the rich man gets stuck in Hades, and yet Lazarus in the place of the unrighteous dead, and yet Lazarus can talk to them. There's a conversation that can happen. So there's an awareness of what takes place. So my summary in all of this is Jesus is still under the old covenant. He is actually fulfilling all the law. So when Jesus dies, he would go where the righteous of the Old Testament would go. He would go to Sheol. But if there's a relational awareness between what's happening for the righteous dead and the unrighteous dead, who else are in this place? The fallen sons of God in prison. So what does Jesus do while he's in Sheol? He's announcing his victory. That's what Peter is saying. Peter is saying that he proclaims to the spirits, it was promised, the proto-evangelion. Remember that one? Genesis 3:15, 16? That the serpent would strike the heel, but the seed of the woman, singular seed, would crush the head.
That's right.
Happened. I did it.
Happened.
All right.
Yeah.
And now watch me bust down the gates of Hades. And I'm going to take a train of captives with me. Who are the train of captives? The righteous dead of the Old Testament. So that now when you and I pass, we do not go to Hades. My view is that we actually go to paradise, to Eden, to the place where God resides, where Jesus resides. This makes sense of Hebrews 13. There's a great cloud of witnesses that is cheering us on. How do we get from a garden in Genesis 3 to a garden city at the end of Revelation? And Jesus is announcing to the spirits, proclaiming to them his victory. This is not about offering them repentance. This is not about offering them like a second chance. This is actually an affirmation of Psalm 82. Arise, O Elohim, inherit the nations, for they are yours. And so Jesus is saying, by the way, that judgment that happens to all evil, malevolent, spiritual beings has been enacted and executed at the cross.
This is so helpful, because the last question that I was going to ask you, which you actually handled very well just now, is how does the divine council view then give us a fuller picture of the cross? Because I guess in Protestant circles especially, a lot of what we understand that the cross accomplishes has to do with guilt and innocence and the forgiveness of sins and so on. But what we're seeing here is that there is that. We're not denying that, but there is also much more that is happening in terms of the relations of the cosmic forces, right? Going all the way back to Genesis and what happened with the sons of God that have fallen and so on. And now here's Jesus going down to the place of the dead, place of the unrighteous, proclaiming his victory. right? These beings that are waiting the final judgment, right? And so there is this kind of victory over the evil cosmic forces in the universe. And so I think there is a lot more going on than just, I shouldn't say just, I mean, forgiveness of sins is a pretty big deal.
Right.
But I think we sometimes, when we focus on that sort of forensic, almost a legal side of things too much, we miss out on that fuller picture of that world story. What is God doing in this world through Jesus Christ?
Yeah, I would say, forgiveness of sins, but for what? For what purpose? This is where, again, our 21st century modern post-enlightenment hyper-individualistic society does a little bit of damage to us when we think about our mission and our vocation as it pertains to the gospel. Look at Colossians chapter 2, verse 14. By canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands, this he set aside, nailing it to the cross. Verse 15, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. So what happens at the cross? The cross is the free offer of forgiveness for all who would turn away from their sin, bend knee, and return to King Jesus, right? The cross is also the means by which the dark powers are disarmed of their power and their authority and their legal claims to humanity because of sin and death. And then this gets to what is the purpose of spiritual warfare. This is where, Steve, I depart a little bit from some of the maybe charismatic movements or some of the other views when it comes to spiritual warfare. I like to distinguish between normative and non-normative. Between normative and non-normative. What is spiritual warfare all about? Spiritual warfare has been, is, and always will be about the people. Every battle always has a prize. And the prize of this unseen battle has always been about the image bearers of God. And so how do we fight this battle? Here's how we fight it. We do exactly what Jesus told us to do. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, by the way, an image of cosmic allegiance, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so this should propel us. The dark powers can no longer blind the nations of the goodness of the gospel. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 5, the ministry of reconciliation. Now, along the way, are you going to encounter evil? 100%. Anytime the gospel advances into dark places, demons shudder, they expose themselves. But there's a difference, and I think this is important. There's a difference from seeking out demons for the sake of demons to do exorcisms and all this other stuff versus saying, no, my primary prerogative given to me by Jesus himself is the proclamation of the gospel. And along the way, that's the normative task. Along the way, is there going to be need for deliverance? Sure. Is there going to be need for even demon exorcism? Absolutely. Is there going to be need to deal with unclean things? You bet. But we have to keep the first things, the primary things, and not get, as Lewis describes, C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters, not have an obsession with the things of the spiritual that we miss Jesus. You know, he uses the terms magician and materialist. Like the enemy loves for us to be consumed and obsessed with the spiritual things, and similarly loves for us to act like none of that even exists. And so the goal of the unseen battle for me, Steve, was to retrieve awareness so that we can do exactly what Jesus called us to do. That our vantage point of this conversation is posture and perspective. Our posture is humble confidence. It's because of what Christ has done and achieved, not because of what I've done. And then our perspective is from the grave, an empty grave. Our perspective is from the place of the victory of King Jesus. And that's what we're tasked towards.
Wow, a lot to think about. And it's been just so helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and hash this out with us. In the last couple of minutes that we have left here, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where would you send them?
Yeah, I do the majority of my kind of public teaching on social media, like most people these days. So Instagram, it's just at my last name, Muddamalle. And then if you're really interested in this topic and conversation, I would recommend my book, The Unseen Battle. It's available on Amazon, wherever books are sold. And then also, if you're like, man, I am really interested, like I want to do a deep dive. I started a brand new project at the beginning of the year with with a podcast group of friends and I. They're called the Blurry Creatures guys. And we started a project called Stranger Theology. And so it's fun. We're doing theological work in this area, writing substantive essays. We've got a premium podcast called the Cosmic Mountain series. So 12 episodes over 12 months that is more than a podcast, hopefully more accessible than seminary, but all theology. And so those are kind of the places that you can hang out with me.
Thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining us for this week's edition of the AC Podcast. You know what Troy tells you, like, subscribe to all of those things so that, we can gain favor in the eyes of the algorithmic overlords and all of that. So make sure you help us out in that way. We'll come back next week with more stuff to think about. Until then, you know the drill. Love God, love people. Bye for now.
It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.